everybody. Welcome back to the Blue Bench. My name's Georgia Hawthorne, and I'm the social media manager for the Montana Democratic Party.
And I'm Shannon O'Brien, former senator, former teacher, and statewide candidate. We're going to start this week on a more solemn note. I'd like to open it up with what happened in Minnesota with the lawmakers there. And we lost, let's call it what it was, which was a political assassination of the Speaker of the House, a Democrat, Melissa Hortman, who was, beloved by many, many people and a very effective lawmaker in many ways. And she and her husband were killed by a gunman who was dressed as a law enforcement officer.
Yeah.
And and there were attempted assassinations on to a senator and his wife. Um, I think that it certainly hit home to me as a former senator, and I reached out and connected with Katie Sullivan, who's minority leader in the House, and Pat Flowers, who's Democrat leader in the Senate, just to touch base. It hits home when someone, the perpetrator had a list,
Yeah.
a lengthy list of political folks who were Democrats,
Yep.
and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. That's really the only word for it. It's heartbreaking, and I think the other word I would use is despicable. To use, especially in a state capacity, they are doing nothing but representing their own communities. State legislature is not a big, fancy, showy position. They were just serving their communities and doing their job, and because of all of this rhetoric happening nationally around politics, they were the unfortunate victims of that rhetoric, that violent rhetoric that we continue to see portrayed, especially at a national level. That rhetoric has an effect on people, and it causes them to do things that they maybe wouldn't do otherwise, like assassinate people in the middle of the night.
And Georgie, I want to point out that this is a fine line that you and I walk all the time as we're delivering our perspectives, but also based in fact of what's taking place at the state level and the federal and international levels of some of these things that are happening. And I think that it's so important. As a teacher, I was trained that when it's behavior management of the basic concept is it's the child's behavior, not the child. And so I just want to remind both of us that as we're talking through this, that when we're saying, can you believe the Republicans did this and did that? These are people.
Yeah.
These are human beings who might have often have significant differences of opinion. But I would be the first one to argue, and many others, that we all want the same thing.
Right.
We all want
On some level.
healthy children, a roof over our heads, prosperity,
Yep.
the hope
Mhm.
of prosperity as we're living in the middle class.
Yep.
Loaded statement there. But I think that it's really important to remind each other that as we're and our listeners that that when we're talking about these folks, that we honor them as human beings, and that violence is never the solution to political disagreements like this. So I think it's really, really important, and thoughts and prayers to all the people of Minnesota and the Governor Walz and the families and and the other legislators.
Absolutely. And I do want to give Senator Tina Smith from Minnesota huge credit because she knew Speaker Hortman personally. That's not surprising. A lot of people who are from Minnesota and in politics knew her. And once the news came out that they were assassinated, there were quite a few Republicans who hopped online and were saying some absolutely, like, horrible, vile things about them, about the shooter, about Governor Walz, implying that Governor Walz had issued, quote, unquote, "a hit," and that, like, he was behind it. Just absolutely absurd things on social media. And a lot of this was from Senator Meg Lee, from Utah, who we will talk about in later. But Senator Smith tracked him down on the floor, confronted him to his face, and was like, "I'm not sure what made you think that was okay. That was my friend. I am grieving. The people of Minnesota are grieving, and this is what you call a good day's work?" And she later said in an interview afterwards that she thought that he was extremely surprised and that he was not expecting to be confronted. And I think that goes back to your point is that someone has to be like, "Hey, this isn't okay. You don't get to talk like that. You don't get to use this kind of violent rhetoric because it has impact, especially after an event like that."
Yeah, unbelievable responses, and, once again, I think that it's so important for us to remember how powerful our words are.
Mhm,
Whether we recognize what our title is or lack of title, whatever it might be, whether it's on social media or on a podcast or before CNN or Fox News, words matter.
mhm.
So choose them carefully, and, we have a lot to learn from that.
Absolutely. Well, Shannon, we've talked too much about violence already on this podcast, so why don't we switch gears to a little bit of good news? These No Kings protests
Yeah,
this past
right.
weekend
Yeah,
absolutely knocked it out of the park.
yeah.
Based on numbers I've seen, I would say there were probably somewhere around 10,000 Montanans who showed up this weekend. And I also saw something that Montana had the third highest turnout per capita in the country, which is awesome. Absolutely incredible. So we had about 10,000 in Montana, and estimates for nationwide are anywhere between 4 and 6 million people, which is anywhere between 1 and 2% of the entire population.
And I wanna point out that this day of protest, the No Kings protest is what it originally was planned, to my knowledge, well before the parade in Washington, the Army military parade was, announced and advertised, in Washington, DC, and so I think the groundswell kind of took place as we're saying and we're seeing on some of, the president's social media
Mhm.
reference to he made a comment, "Long live the king,"
Yeah.
and it didn't seem to be connected to any, international country's
Mhm.
king. It
Yeah.
seemed to be a reference and, to himself, which is of course very concerning, but to see that many people show up to express their, disappointment and, lack of acceptance
Mhm.
of what's taking place, and we'll talk more about that later.
And I attended the protest here in Missoula, and it was awesome. It was incredible to have that many people around that are with you, because you can feel really alone really easily right now in the political climate, and to have so many people around you, that's the kind of hope that we have to keep holding on to if we're gonna survive the next 4 years. And the other good part about Saturday is that so this parade was meant to be for the 250th birthday of the Army, and that's why the parade was initially going to happen. So it happened to fall on Trump's birthday, and so he kind of co-opted it, and it became his birthday parade, which is weird, but it was a flop anyways. There were, like, no people there. They said they were expecting up to, like, 200,000 people or something in DC, and the photos I saw were not anywhere near 200,000, and it's got to the point where White House officials are trying to post old photos from
Mhm.
old rallies
Oh, wow.
in that area of DC and be like, "No, no, no, look, there were people here, there were people here," and everyone's like, "It's sunny. It was raining." What do you mean this is the same day, the same event? So I was very excited to see that the protest went extremely well and his weird birthday parade flopped. But in regards to these protests, there's been a concept that's been floating around called the 3.5% rule.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Okay. So the 3.5% rule is a political science term that essentially says if a population has 3.5% or more take to the streets in nonviolent protest, that's a very key part of this. Nonviolent protests, change always comes after. Any major social movement that has put out this 3.5% number, they have always made change. There has not been a single case that has failed. And that's not to say you have to hit 3.5% in order for things to happen, because that's not true either. So this 3.5% is your high goal. If you're organizing a movement, that's the number you want to hit. And this No Kings protest on Saturday, with that 4 to 6 million number in attendance, that attendance hovers between 1 and 2%, depending on where that number falls. So we're about halfway-ish to that 3.5% number. And for the first real major showing of protests that I think this country has seen since BLM in 2020,
Yeah.
I think that's an incredible start.
Yeah.
And I will elaborate a little bit more on this. Nonviolent protests, and this is why people are so incredibly supportive of peaceful protests, is because nonviolent protests are twice as likely to succeed in bringing about change than violent protests are. And part of that is because nonviolent peaceful protests are simply more accessible for people. If you're older, if you're disabled, you're not going to go to a violent protest because you are just going to be putting yourself and others in danger.
That's right.
So if you're old, if you're young, if you're disabled, you can come to a peaceful protest.
So I think we also had the April 5th,
That good one too.
which was about on par with those numbers. And I think we had approximately 10,000 estimated in Montana. I know that there were well over 100,000 in New York and other places. And there have been other events that have been taking place. But one of the things that really concerns me is what we've been seeing in Los Angeles
Yeah.
and the protests that have been taking place there day after day after day after day in response to the immigration raids,
Right.
are concerning. In my highest concern was when Trump sent in the Marine Corps, and later they were removed shortly after. But um, I listened to a former Marine Corps member who served in that same battalion many years before, and he was explaining that you have law enforcement who are trained well to de-escalate.
Right.
Marine Corps
Or not.
officers are trained for battle
Yeah.
and to protect the United States of America.
Right.
And protect our rights, freedom and liberty, and those things against an enemy. And so sending them in to fight the American people
Yeah.
really scared me. That was a very high concern for me.
I think that's absolutely valid, and I think a lot of people were scared to go this weekend because of that. I know I was pretty nervous. Granted, we live in Missoula, Montana. It's not a very big town. Like, our police are generally pretty unproblematic and great. I wasn't really expecting anything to happen. Nothing did. Nothing happened at any of the protests in Montana, really. But the group that I went with, I still made sure that we were all in clothing that was reasonable. We were all in closed-toed shoes that we could run in. I brought a bag with snacks and water and towels and a first aid kit.
Right.
And I really truly didn't think anything was going to happen, but I knew that there was a possibility. I knew that the chance wasn't zero.
Yeah.
And so I had to show up with what I could
Yeah.
to protect myself and those around me if it did go south.
Yes.
I'm very, very thankful that it did not, and I know that most of the protests across the country on Saturday were peaceful.
Yeah.
And that's where our power is.
Yep, that's where our power is. Power to the people. Power to the people. And speaking of power to the people, right now is a hot moment at the federal level with this, uh, big, bad, terrible, horrible, not beautiful bill,
Yup.
that makes unbelievable cuts to basic services to constituents, including healthcare and, including education and, all sorts of other areas we can talk about. But one piece that is, I'm really struggling with, Georgie, is that our Senator Daines has publicly said that he disagrees with the economists and the federal nonpartisan budget office, um, and congressional budget office that clearly explains the cost of this bill and the significant increase in our national debt.
Yeah.
And that is major cuts to taxes for the wealthiest people and major cuts to these services.
And for what? To raise the debt by 2.4, 2.8, 3 trillion, whatever the number is now? I swear every time I see it, it goes up. But you're right. I mean, you don't get to pick and choose facts. I don't know how this has happened in our society, but you don't get to pick and choose facts that you like and that you want to believe and facts that you don't like and don't want to believe. That's not how they work.
So I'll just share, having served on tax committee, which is very complex. I will say it's tax law is you move this piece of the puzzle over and it shifts that and it's very complex. But I will say this that and it's quite true with any bill or any specific issue. If it doesn't make sense and you dig deeper to get a deeper understanding and it still doesn't make sense, and you have conversations, earnest, open conversations with colleagues that are from the point of, "Help me understand." And I tried as a legislator, I tried as best I could to suspend my decisions until I had as much information as possible.
Right.
And that's not easy to do.
I believe
I
that.
will say that is that because you wanna come in there fighting for what you think is right and what is good and that kind of thing, and these issues are complex. But, a question to ask a staffer when, please, you make those phone calls to your, to Daines and to Sheehy, because that bill is in the Senate right now, and it is getting changed up
All over the
in
place.
committees, and then it'll have to go back to the House. But when you're able to get that conversation with your, senator, a an approach is, "Help me understand." Certainly, by the end of the conversation, be clear on what you want your senator to
Right.
do. Vote no on this bill or change this bill so that the deficit isn't terrible and there aren't phenomenal, unbelievable tax breaks for the wealthiest. But that other piece of help me understand how it is, Senator Daines, that you're justifying this bill by explaining that it doesn't have the impact that it has
Yeah.
or that it will have, that all of these experts have claimed it.
Well, Shannon, I think that's the thing that's pissing me off the most is that they're not even trying to say, like, oh, well, it's okay if we raise the deficit this time because it's what we want to do. Because that's usually the tune that gets played. No, they're just straight up denying that it doesn't raise the deficit, which is just blatantly and wildly untrue. It's not even like political spin or trying to game it or anything like that at this point. It's just straight up lies.
Yeah.
And I have some questions for Senator Daines that I don't know if we will ever find out the answers to. But there was a provision in the House package that sold off millions of acres of land, of public land in the West, That public lands package got amended out in the House, and so it was sent over to the Senate without that provision in it. Senator Mike Lee from Utah, who I told you guys we'd bring up again, he's put that back in the Senate version. It's 3.3 million acres for sure, but it also authorizes like an extra 250 million. But specifically in this Senate provision, Montana is completely carved out of it. There's not a single acre of public land in Montana that is in this package. But if you look at the western border, it's the entirety of the Idaho Panhandle. It's basically the entire PNW. Um, but the thing about that is, if they come for public land in one place,
Right.
they're coming for it here next.
Yes.
If they pass this, they're gonna come back in a year and be like, "Oh, well, we need more money, so well, we sold a lot of land last time, and that got us a lot of money, so why don't we just do that again? And we spared Montana last time, so we can just go after them now." And so my question to Danes is how and what did you promise or what was your maneuver to get Montana out of that bill so you didn't have to vote against your own party?
This is a great time to put a plug in for the Grounded podcast with Senator John Tester, Maritza Giorgio, and they've got some amazing guests, and, they recently had a Heather Cox Richardson on as a guest, and she is from the East Coast, and she brought up the concept of public lands, and she said, "You know, I know that," or she said something to the effect of, "I know that this has been an issue that's really important to most Montanans and has been for a while, but what you should know is most people on the East Coast and the Midwest don't have any idea what public lands means, that concept, and so for those of you who are interested in extra credits, calling lawmakers, calling senators, and House members in the Eastern United States to educate their staffers, again, that's how it goes up the chain of command, or sending an email about how important public lands are, I think is an important factor. People genuinely don't know. In fact, I was visiting some friends a couple weeks ago in North Carolina, and I brought a Democratic Party Montana Democratic Party canvas bag that had public
Yep.
land owner.
Check out our merch store. It's great.
Yeah, and neither of them had any idea, and he's an economist at a university, and he was a little bit familiar, but not real familiar with the concept of the public land grab and the concern there, so I think it's really important for us to help educate people who are outside of Montana as well.
Totally. And the Capitol switchboard phone number is 202-224-3121. Again, that's 202-224-3121. And all you got to do is call that number and say, I would like to talk to Senator so and so. I'd like to talk to Representative so and so. And they will directly connect you to that office. You can call Daines and Sheehy that way too, if that's your preferred way. You can call a local office. And as always, I'll put those phone numbers in the description of this podcast.
And again, I'm hearing lots of Montanans saying, "This is enough. Enough is enough. What can I do?" And showing up at the protests is certainly one of them, but this is something you can do. Spend an hour or 2 calling your members of Congress and then others as well to spread the word of the importance.
Absolutely. And I wish this public land provision was the only bad thing. There's been a lot since it came out of the House. We've actually had a chance to look at it and figure out more of what's in it other than just the talking points that we were fed for so long while it was in the House. And one of the most concerning things to me is that in all of their Medicaid cuts, they make a provision that says if a health clinic provides abortions, they cannot receive Medicaid funding, period. Medicaid funding already cannot be used for abortions. It's federally illegal to use federal money to acquire an abortion, which is Medicaid. But this is essentially a backdoor attack on Planned Parenthood. It would defund Planned Parenthood, essentially. I think they get around half of their revenue from Medicaid patients. They're already talking about how if this happens, they're gonna have to start closing doors. And Planned Parenthood is 4 out of 6 abortion clinics in Montana.
And I just wanna add that we're not this is not about Planned Parenthood.
No.
This is about giving health care
Right.
that has the government out of my business
Mhm.
and making sure that whatever the complexities are
Mhm.
with my body and my healthcare, the government stays out of it, and I'm able to make decisions
Mhm.
um, about my healthcare. And I think of all of the doctors who practice OBGYN, um, and how limiting that will be, um, because if they're caring for patients,
Mhm.
it's not just, uh, delivery and, making sure that uterine cancer is not a problem.
Mhm.
So, my point is, um, yes, Planned Parenthood it provides a great service, but it's also other clinics as
Mhm.
well, and, um, and I will say that one of the biggest challenges I had as a legislator was debating the bills around this issue
Mhm.
and making I wonder statements about why all of these people in this 50-person chamber, who were mostly retired white men,
Mhm.
why they thought they could have that business.
Yeah. I think the other really concerning part about it is that so, yes, it's essentially a backdoor abortion ban, but by closing down these clinics, by pulling so much of their funding from Medicaid, is that you are restricting access for people, especially in rural areas. You are restricting access for low-income folks, and I'm not even talking abortion access. I am just talking super basic reproductive care. I'm talking
Yeah,
access to
that's
birth
right.
control. I'm
That's right.
talking STI testing,
Yeah,
cancer screenings,
that's
mammograms,
that's right.
things like that. That is the care that's going to be restricted here
Yeah,
because we've proven time and time again that banning abortion doesn't stop abortion.
yeah.
Shannon, I really think our rural Montanans are absolutely catching the brunt of this. It's easier for those of us who live in towns, but if you live in a rural area, your services are getting slashed left and right. Element of this big bill is so it started, like I said, everything started in the House, and in the House, they said that states can't regulate artificial intelligence or AI for 10 years. Point blank, can't regulate it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, actually spoke out against this specific provision after she voted yes on the bill, and she was like, "Oh, I don't support this. I didn't know that was in there." Girl, you're the representative, read the bill. But so it goes over to the Senate. Senate has currently amended it so that states can't regulate AI if they want federal money for broadband, which is internet. So they're basically saying you don't get to regulate the internet if you like to use it. And there are parts of rural Montana that still don't have broadband. We are not a tiny little state like Delaware or something where it's pretty easy to get internet up everywhere. We are not that. There's a decent chunk of eastern Montana that still does not have access to reliable internet, and this is our trade-off?
And I wanna just add that when you say that, just one step further interpretation for folks in rural areas, I think of schools, and students getting access to information for their reports or more,
Mhm.
whatever it might be, but also healthcare is a big piece, and a lot of folks are able to if you don't wanna drive 6 hours,
Mhm.
5 hours from Glasgow to Billings for your doctor's appointment, you can do telemed,
Yeah.
and you can have it on your screen, and there are points throughout Montana that they're still working on that,
Mhm.
and that infrastructure bill, of of the Biden and Tester work, is getting us there,
Mhm.
but that work is still taking place. So I think that that is a really important point. And additionally, AI, artificial intelligence is something that is we are still learning about, and the capabilities of there's this spectrum of people who know lots about it and use it all the time, and there are people who are like, "I don't even know what that is. I would never use it. I don't know what it is. I think it's evil." Or, people anyway, there's this broad spectrum. So, I think we need to be preparing ourselves to, and not eliminating opportunities to be responsive at the state level for legislators to do their job.
I mean, I am an AI hater. I it's so scary to me. I it that is like the robot apocalypse to me is ChatGPT. I know that those are not the same thing, but in my head they are. But so I graduated college right around the time that ChatGPT was really becoming a thing. So I had used it, but not really, cause like, I didn't wanna get caught, it felt really icky to me. I was like, "You know what? I would just rather do it myself." And it's been a couple of years since then, and now we are seeing kids who are literally unable to do their schoolwork because they just plug everything into an AI, and the AI does it for them. And so they're not actually learning anything, they're just learning how to use this AI tool. And that's my question is, could the state say, "Hey, you don't get to use AI in school?" Like,
Oh,
is that a regulation that would fall under
oh,
this?
absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
it makes no sense to me
Yeah.
to have like, why are you so opposed to guardrails?
And I think a lot of people don't realize that they're using AI when they pull up whatever search engine, Safari will say, on their iPhone.
Mhm,
And all of a sudden, people may have noticed in the last number of months, there's all of a sudden more information at the very beginning,
mhm,
and that's your AI.
yep,
And, how is that information gathered? How many reliable sources
mhm.
are they really pulling from? So, um,
I mean, I was looking up Juneteenth events
oh, yeah,
for social media
yeah.
the other day, and I had looked up, like, Billings, Montana Juneteenth events, and the Google AI was like, "There's an event in Billings at 5 p.m.
Ah,
on Juneteenth,"
ah.
and it gave me all of the details for the Helena event. So those are a couple of the niche things that are happening with this big, terrible bill, but I don't want anyone to lose sight of the major themes of it either. It is cutting Medicaid dramatically, kicking millions of Americans off of their health coverage. We are talking about cutting food assistance for hungry
Yeah.
kids on top of all of these other things, and they want to pass this bill by the 4th of July. That is their self-imposed timeline and when they're gonna try to get it done by. So now is probably the better week to do it in case
Yeah.
they go on recess next week. So again, call Senator Daines, call Senator Sheehy. The number to the Capitol switchboard is 202-224-3121 and tell them to vote no on the reconciliation bill.
Yeah, always an opportunity to take action, and, as we are moving forward, bringing it a little closer to home, let's talk a little bit about the promised vetoes, which we'll
Mhm.
get into more in our next episode, but I just wanna give you a teaser with one, that was just heartbreaking, I'll be real honest. We're seeing with fire there was a bill to include, um, PTSD
Mm.
treatment for firefighters. We're finding more and more that firefighters are experiencing, um, a lot of, consequences to their, amazing and very important work, and full disclosure, I'll be real honest, I come from a family of firefighters. I have 2 uncles who are firefighters. My brother's getting ready to retire next month after 34 years in the fire service, and 2 of his 3 boys are now firefighters. And, in addition, I just see their first response, whether it's a car accident or it's a home that actually burns. And I had a conversation with my brother many years ago, early on, and he was doing training. He was a underwater search and rescue, high-angle search and rescue, and they have all these special teams, very sophisticated, risk management and, safety, and I remember thinking, "How cool." High-angle search and rescue and
Yeah.
underwater search and
No,
rescue,
that's
all that
awesome.
scuba diving, and he was like, actually, underwater search and rescue, think about a murky place, maybe at night, where what you're looking for
Mhm.
and, like a dead body.
Yeah.
And, he said it's there's nothing glamorous about that.
I
And
agree with
and
that.
and then I made a comment about how hard it must be for him to experience death like that and being with the people and he was saying that in many ways it's a source of support for them that he finds very emotionally draining but helpful
Yeah.
because when you're a firefighter you are a helper.
Yeah.
And he said the hardest part of his job is often just seeing how some people live. That when they're living in poverty
Mhm.
and they're working 3 jobs and they're not expecting company,
Yeah.
that that's a real tough part of the job as well. So, um, this bill went through to support PTSD and firefighters, and it was vetoed by the governor.
It Why?
And thank you. Thank you. So I encourage you all, and in your social media, you'll be seeing in our check out our social media and our press releases. You'll be hearing more and more about these vetoes. The governor does send a veto letter that includes the reason for the veto. But that's just one of many bills that went through the Senate. Many of these were unanimous, 100 to 0 in the House chamber, and still were vetoed. So, stay tuned for this, and, there are still bills out there to be signed, so this is the time to, pay attention there, and we'll give you more information on that.
Great.
On a happier note,
Thank goodness.
it's late June,
Yes, it is.
and do you know what that means?
4th of July?
We're just coming on right on up. Not a lot of time between now and the 4th of July, and, the 4th of July is a very special time for lots of people for all sorts of reasons. Many, many folks take the whole week off, and it's a time to be with family, it's time to, eat good food, burgers, hot dogs, brats, whatever it might be.
Be on the water. I feel like I am always on the water, whether that be a lake or a river on the 4th of
Yeah,
July.
yeah. I wanna make sure that, we remind our listeners that the reason behind the 4th of July is a time to fly
Mhm.
our American flags, and recognize that 1776 was the independence of the United States of America, and it's a very historic moment. Actually, a little tidbit from the social studies teacher, the Declaration of Independence was actually voted on the 3rd, but they signed it on the 4th.
Maybe that's why Dio
So
takes a 3rd of July so seriously.
but that is also one part of history I encourage us to dive down into, but here's my plug. Find your local, parade and march in it. Put on your Democrats hat. Put on your Democrats shirt. Wear your reach out to your central committee
Totally.
in your county and find out anything you know about, that they might know about your local parades. I must have marched last year because they start around the 1st in the state of Montana, and they go through probably the 5th. So I think I was able to hit as a candidate, uh, 6 or 7 parades.
I feel like you love a parade.
Boom, 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 boom.
I just feel like you love parades.
I invited a couple to march with me in the parade in Laurel, which is huge. If you live in Billings, go to the Laurel parade. If
Really?
you live it's huge. like, goes
Wild.
because there's no parade in Billings, so but he goes out there. Anyway, this lovely woman showed up for me, and she was marching with me, and I asked where her husband was, who I adore, they're both lovely, and she's like, "Yeah, he doesn't like parades." And it was just shocking to me. Who doesn't love a parade? I guess not everybody loves a parade, but we need showing, in our parades. We need people to show up. There's a great one in Georgetown. They're all over the state. So, find out where your parade is and find out where you can march with Democrats. Anaconda has a great parade. Of course, there's Butte, but, take a look around.
Well, that's a great plug, Shannon, but I think that's all we've got for folks this week, unless you have anything else.
Nope, not for me. Thanks
Awesome.
so much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate it.
Call your senators. Bye.
Bye.